Hello and welcome to my channel Study History with Mr. P and to my GCSE history topic summary about the policy of containment and the Soviet response to it. So containment is a name given to the US foreign policy during the Cold War in which it tried to contain, so keep in and restrict the spread of communism. Now, this became a key issue for Truman and the USA because they were worried that after the creation of the Soviet satellite states, that other countries in Europe and beyond were also at threat of communism. This was because many of the economies of Europe had been ruined during the Second World War. They'd seen homes, factories and infrastructure destroyed, creating the right kind of economic conditions for communism to spread. This became even more alarming by 1947 due to events in Greece. So during the Second World War, two rival groups, a pro-royalist and a communist group, had worked together to try and hold back the Nazis. After the Second World War, these two groups fell out and a civil war developed. To start with, Britain had supported the pro-royalist group, the monarchists, to try and maintain the monarchy in Greece. But Britain itself was badly damaged by the Second World War and could no longer afford to keep its commitments to Greece and asked the USA to step in. And this is where the Truman Doctrine and the plan that follows it, the Marshall Plan, come into play. So on the 12th of March 1947, President Truman made a speech to Congress which became known as the Truman Doctrine. In it, he talked about the values of democracy, but also the second way of life, by which he meant the communist way of life, and how it restricted personal freedoms, and that the USA should do everything it could if it basically stopped the spread of communism. Now, the Marshall Plan was the Truman Doctrine in practice, i.e. it was the actual plan to provide aid to countries such as Greece. The USA was able to do this because, unlike the economies of Europe, US infrastructure was sound and in place after the Second World War and therefore was in a position to help other countries financially. And so Truman used his speech to make clear what he saw as the fundamental differences between democracy and communism, but also to announce a plan of $400 million of US aid to Greece and also to Turkey, as well as using American civilian and military personnel to support in the restructuring of their economies. Now, the wider aspect of this became known as the Marshall Plan out of Secretary of State George Marshall, who put forward the plan. It's also sometimes called the European Recovery Plan. It lasted from 1948 to 1951, giving things such as food, fuel, machinery and money to these countries to enable them to get back on their feet after the war. In all, about $13 billion of US aid would be given through this plan. And its aim was to help these economies, as I've said, to grow. It was also decided that in theory this aid could go to Soviet satellite states, or the countries controlled by the Soviet Union, although in practice, of course, none of these countries took up this offer. Instead, the Soviet Union responded with its own plans known as Comecon and Cominform. So Cominform was the Communist Information Bureau and Comecon was the communist equivalent of the Marshall Plan. The Comecon, the Communist Information Bureau, set up in 1947, originally had 9 members, which were the communist parties of the Soviet Union, as well as the satellite states, so Bulgaria, Hungary, Czechoslovakia, Poland and Romania, and also the communist parties of Yugoslavia, France and Italy. This gave Stalin a way of controlling the governments of the satellite states and also the other parties in these countries that followed communism. It encouraged them to concentrate on trade with Cominform members. Comecon came a few years later, the Council for Mutual Economic Assistance, in 1949, and its aim was to provide economic support and development across the satellite states, but essentially actually aimed at helping primarily the Soviet Union. So the satellite states, Soviet Union, East Germany, arranged trade and credit agreements through this plan. So Stalin essentially used Comecon to try and organise industrial planning across the satellite states, in effect with different countries having different responsibilities in terms of goods and agriculture to produce.